Hello all. Thank you for coming and welcome to the second of the Period Power Project workshops. This one is a day in the life with a period, and it is about just the different experiences that people with periods go through on a daily basis. So let's get started. Just an overview of the things that are going to happen today. First, I have an intro about myself and about this project, just a little bit. I just want to share where I've been coming from. Second, there are some terms that I might use in this presentation. There are some terms that I might be using in this presentation that some of you might not be familiar with, so I just want to get us all up to speed. Then the third part is going to be a rundown of some things on a typical day for someone with a period. And then we're going to talk to Julie Taylor. Julie Taylor is Dr. Julie Taylor is one of my helpers for my project managers. And she is a specialist in hormone therapy and just making sure that the body is healthy and the best it can be through hormones, if there are any hormone imbalances or stuff like that. So she is going to talk a little bit about the different experiences that not so normal menstruators go through. So there's going to be some things that I'm not educated about that she, as a doctor and as a medical professional, will be able to share with us. After that, there will be a Q&A and a conclusion. So let's get started. A little bit about me. I am a Girl Scout and I'm earning my Gold Award. It is an 80-hour community service project, and I had to present to the Girl Scout Council. I got a lot of really great feedback. They approved my project, and here we are. I've done some surveys, and I've done a bunch of just collecting the data from that survey and analyzing it and putting it in the charts, and then it's gone on my website. And it's been a long process so far to get to these workshops, but here we are. They're going to turn into recordings and continue past my time leading this project. Okay, some quick project facts. 193 people, actually, it's 194 now since we announced this last. Somebody joined, so I gotta edit my data. 5 workshops. You're attending one of them. This is the second of 5 workshops. I have a website. You guys can definitely check that out. And I have an Instagram account that posts facts, period facts, and project updates. So check that out also if you have not. Some terms. All right. Over the course of this workshop, I may or may not mention some of these terms, and I know that people with periods might be more knowledgeable and more comfortable with what they mean, and people without periods might not know. So let's start with a leak. A leak is when blood escapes a pad or a tampon or a period underwear and gets on your clothes. It can stain regular underwear. It can stain chairs, couches, you name it. They are unfortunately very common among menstruators, and just can really throw a wrench in your day if you have to clean your clothes or clean a couch or a chair. So they're unfortunate, but they're pretty common. I use the word menstruator. I like to use gender neutral and gender inclusive terms because one might think that because you have to be a woman to have a period. Unfortunately, that's not true, because as my survey shows, there are plenty of men and non-binary folk and people all across the gender spectrum that have periods or had periods at one point in their life. And I would love to be inclusive to them so we can talk about a whole range of period experiences. A flow, I'm going to use this word a lot, is just the flow of blood from your body. We just shorten it as flow, but it's often described as heavy or light, meaning there's more or less blood coming out, and it can change. At the beginning of a period, it can be one thing, heavy or light. At the end of a period, it can be another. During the day, even, you can be heavy in the morning and light at night. it's a fluctuating sort of term. Another one, insert. I feel like I had to include this one because oftentimes I use the word insert without saying insert into the vagina or insert into the body. But that is what I'm talking about if I use that word. This applies to tampons and menstrual cups, not to pads or period underwear or reusable pads, because those things do not go inside your body. All right. So now we're going to give a rundown of a typical day or some typical experiences. Some of them are positive experiences, but most of them are pretty negative because what is negative is what is not seen by people without periods. So let's start the day. When you wake up, there is already stress because over the night is a long amount of time to have a tampon stay in and still be absorbing, or to have a pad still be absorbing. Or what if you started your period in the middle of the night? The moment you wake up, I know I've been worried if I leaked on my bed, or if I like need to really quickly put in a new tampon or pad before it gets on my clothes. So this is pretty stressful to just start the day off in this sort of unknowing, stressful environment and have to either be relieved that I didn't leak, or be super frustrated and sort of inconvenienced for a great part of the morning. Because when something like that happens, you have to change your clothes, you have to clean them, you have to clean the bed sheets. Sometimes you have to clean the bed itself. Sometimes you have to clean the blanket. And it's not a fun experience. And it's a pretty private experience because this is something that's happening in your bedroom. This is something that's happening within your own home. If you don't live with someone who has a period and are not directly affected by this is something you're not going to be thinking about. This is an aspect of having a period that might go unconsidered. So I think it's really important to touch on that. The next part of it, I am a high schooler. I know a lot about navigating a day in school with a period. I'm not as knowledgeable about work, navigating a work day, but we can touch on that later. So American high schools and high schools in many other countries have some pretty negative aspects if you have a period, if you're a menstruator, including teachers not letting you go to the bathroom. If you really it's time to change your tampon, but you're in the middle of class and your teacher says no, or you're trying to get between classes and you don't have enough time. When you get to class, the teacher says no because class is just starting. And they say no in the middle because you're interrupting class. And they say no at the end because it's almost time to transition. So it's no's all across the board. Also, I personally have never experienced this, but in my survey, it was talked a lot about the fact that if you leak onto your underwear or your pants during school and people see, kids are kind of immature, and instead of understanding that that's natural and a normal part of life, they can be rude or hurtful about it. Especially boys who are uneducated, because you go into two rooms when you do sex education or when you do puberty videos, and you don't get to learn. Boys don't get to learn about what the girls are going through, and girls don't get to learn what the boys are going through. And non-binary people are just, what room do they go in? Are they going in both? Who knows? So this level of, and this is actually getting better. I noticed that mostly there were stories of times of humiliation from older people when I was taking in the survey, and younger people were mentioning that they had positive experiences where people had supported them and pointed out to them. So I'm seeing a positive trend there, which is nice, but this is still something to consider. Another thing, when you do movement in class, PE, yoga, whatever you're doing for school, that's what triggers the blood to come out. Your muscles are constricting, they're moving around, and it's uncomfortable. It's not it's not a nice feeling, but you can't really sit out PE because the teacher won't let you do that, or it's just you have to live with this uncomfortable feeling. Or you have cramps during PE, or you have such bad cramps you can't even go to school. I have friends that have passed out during school because of their cramps were so bad. And that's really tough for them. And it's something that many people have to live with, bad cramps that they kind of have to suffer through silently or take medicine for on a daily basis. Another case of immaturity, being afraid of pads or tampons or period underwear for that matter. I think it's a pretty common stereotypical thing to hear, oh, like there's a pad that fell out of my bag and all the boys thought it was really weird. They screamed or they thought it was gross. And I just think that's something that is true. That is certainly something that is even true today. And it's something that is really negative, a negative effect on people who have periods, because that's normal for them. And you're calling this very necessary part of their life disgusting. And you're furthering the stigma and the taboo that come with talking about these things. So I think it's really important to me that there's an education that happens so that we all know that those menstrual products are not negative. They're not an issue in our lives. Another menstrual product issue is a lack of stocking the bathrooms with pads and tampons. My school is generally pretty good about this, but if they're out because people use them, a lot of times the kids, the younger girls and the younger non-binary people are afraid to say to the office, hey, can we get more? Because that's an embarrassing conversation for them. And I know in California, it's mandated that, schools should have to provide hygiene products in the bathrooms, but are they always stocked? They're not. There are many, many buildings and many schools where there is not funding or there is not attention paid to stock the restrooms. So having them is very different from requiring them. So that's another issue. And the ever classic, are you on your period, sort of looking down upon somebody because you think that they might be having, putting down their opinions, using periods to put them down, which I hope it's not happening much, but the results of my survey are telling me happens quite a bit. So this is just in school. If you're at work, I've heard stories where from my survey where people's employers felt that they could hold in their periods during long work meetings, or where their work consistently didn't stock any period hygiene products. They were unstocked for many, many years, and this person had to bring in products themselves constantly, either to keep stocking those restrooms or just bring their bag in with them every time that they forgot that they were going to start their period. And sometimes people don't have that luxury because there are people out at work, even out in public spaces and public restrooms, where sometimes somebody is economically impoverished and they can't afford the cost of a box of tampons, or if they do, they have to stretch them thin and there's nothing available for them in public restrooms. What are they going to do? They're going to use things that aren't sanitary and aren't meant to be used for pads or tampons, like toilet paper or sometimes socks or cloth. And that's not sanitary. That is not what those things are meant to be used for. But that is what they feel forced to do because there is no access for them to those products. And that is a big issue, finding products. So if you're out and about, what do you do when it comes time to change your period, like change your tampon or pad? This is what I was just talking about. Hopefully a restroom has them. Over the course of my time as being in this school board, I've tested many restrooms to see, is this really stocked? And I found less than half of them were stocked. Oftentimes only one of the two options were stocked. You could get a pad or a tampon, but not either of them. You couldn't really pick. And they're just empty, and they've probably been empty for years because no one is paying the attention to stock them. So what happens is you have to carry your supplies with you in a purse or in a pocket. And then what happens if you run out? There are a lot of negative stories that I heard about people in the store, or people whose spouses or significant others didn't feel comfortable enough buying the products for them. So this person had to go, and when they were in pain, when they were on their period, and purchase things for themselves. Or there was a negative experience in a store where people would look strangely at them just because they were carrying this out in public and not hiding it before they got to their register. And then what if you don't have products? So why don't you have them? You're looking for them now, but why don't you have them? Again, I mentioned money. I've done the calculations. Studies have been done. $6,360 in a lifetime is a safe estimate. If you're buying reusable tampons and you're using maybe a box for every period, and you're doing that for many years and many months. And this has a really negative impact on people financially if that's something that they need to do. Additionally, if they're in pain, as I mentioned earlier, it's incredibly difficult for some people to go about their lives while on their period because they have such extreme pain. And this might be played down as, oh, you're just being sensitive, or, oh, you're joking about it, you just want time off. But this is a really serious issue for some people. Additionally, sometimes your period comes when you're not expecting it. And again, a machine is empty, or you're forced to look through like 3 different stalls to find one that maybe has enough toilet paper that you can use before you get to like a CVS where you can buy something. And then I was completely blindsided by this. I had not thought about this, but the supply chain shortage is also affecting period products. There is a tampon shortage right now, and it's not talked about because periods are taboo. This is something there's a stigma against. People are uncomfortable talking about period products. So this is not an issue that's being addressed because no one's bringing it to light. No one knows unless they do active research, unless they need those products and can't find them. This issue isn't being brought to light. However, that was a bunch of negative stuff. There are also very positive aspects of having a period. There's a sort of bond that was, many people described this in the survey. Many people described that they had a bond with people because they were both on their period. They were helping each other find products if they had an extra for somebody who needed one because the restroom was out. If they wanted to make sure that they weren't leaking onto their pants. I've done countless checks to see if my friends were leaking on their pants. And that's just me helping them out as someone who understands what they're talking about. They don't have to go and check and go to the restroom and take time out of their school day to check. I can be a friend to them in that way. Or if there's an emergency, people talked about the fact that friends would give them a jacket to tie around their waist or find some pants for them to change out of. And that camaraderie and that togetherness of a group of people who are menstruators is really amazing, I think. And it's also something that isn't talked about as much, that there is this camaraderie that comes from this shared negative experience sometimes of being in tough situations and having a period together, even if it's uncomfortable. So that's just a lot of parts of the day that are pretty difficult to deal with. But there's also, as I'm saying, there is also some benefit. You gain this sisterhood, as some have called it, this friendship of having periods together. So it's a little bit of a downer, a little bit of a lot of negative experiences, but I also want to talk now to Julie Taylor, Dr. Julie Taylor. my project manager can speak some more now. So I'm going to. All right.
So yeah, I appreciate you doing this workshop and inviting me to be a part of it. This is an important subject, and you know, I've never really been part of a workshop like this, and I think it's a really important conversation that, especially for young women, that you know isn't really readily available. So, so I'll just kind of give a brief overview of kind of some things, given sort of what you said, and then happy to answer kind of more specific questions. So what I do in my practice, I'm an MD. I'm a functional medicine physician. So I actually see patients in my office for a variety of reasons. And really the goal of the practice is to get down to the root of the problem. So whatever that might be, whatever might bring you in. But I see a lot of women for hormone issues, and kind of more geared towards, you know, when I'm speaking of younger patients, I see women who have difficult periods or heavy periods or migraines related to their periods, or heavy cramping or mood swings related to their periods. And all of that, I think that it's important to understand that while those things might be normal for that individual, and that particular girl might have been experiencing those symptoms for years, even, you know, a lifetime, it's those symptoms aren't normal. So, you know, I see a lot of girls who have been suffering for a long time. So if you think of, like, you know, your cohort, Eleanor, just kind of like the teenage years, you know, suffering from migraines, suffering from heavy bleeding, which I define in my practice as changing a pad or tampon more than every 2 hours. So if, you know, if you're doing that, that's an indication that your periods are too heavy and that your hormones are not in balance. And so the way that I approach that is sort of multifold. There's a dietary aspect that I address. I look at hormones, you know, look at other reasons why their periods might be heavy, or why they might have, you know, terrible cramps, debilitating cramps, why they might have migraines every single month. So that's what I see in my practice. And those are really, you know, those are the patients that are, I think you're kind of more particularly talking about. So I think in light of what I do, I'm happy to answer sort of more specific questions if people have questions that are, you know, that they kind of want to know more about.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick. Can you talk about, I know you mentioned this, can you talk about the connection between migraines and heavy periods, or even periods at all?
Yeah. So what happens with the menstrual cycle, if you kind of just walk through a month-long menstrual cycle. So the first day of bleeding is considered the first day of your menstrual cycle. It typically lasts for between 5 to 7 days. After that, ovulation happens around day 14. So between day 1 and day 14 is considered the follicular phase. After ovulation, we enter into the luteal phase. The luteal phase is about 2 weeks before the period starts. And what happens at that point is that there is a follicle at ovulation, the follicle is being released with the anticipation of it being fertilized every month. Like, your body every single month is preparing to have a baby. And when it realizes that fertilization is not happening, or I guess just kind of to back up for a second. So in anticipation of that fertilization, the uterine lining kind of gets ready, and progesterone increases in order to prepare the uterus for implantation of that egg. When that doesn't happen, estrogen drops, progesterone drops, and the progesterone dropping causes a sloughing off of the uterus, which is what causes the period. So now you're back at day 1 again. So with the migraines and, all the sort of PMS symptoms that women deal with, it is really the estrogen to progesterone imbalance that's happening during that luteal phase, which again is that 2 weeks right before the period. And that's usually the time when women experience PMS, anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks before they get their period. So whether it's mood swings or heavy bleeding or not heavy bleeding, but cramps or migraines, it's usually that 1 to 2 weeks before your period. And it's the drop in progesterone that is usually too much of a drop that causes an estrogen dominance, which is the imbalance of estrogen and progesterone. It's all about that balance. So estrogen has to be balanced with progesterone. And if it's not, if that very specific balance isn't there for that particular person, they will suffer from PMS symptoms. And PMS looks different for lots of different people. Not every woman suffers from PMS in the same way.
Thank you. That's super interesting. Does anybody else have a question that they want to raise their hand or put in the chat?
Medications. So if you sort of went to your standard, family practitioner or gynecologist, they would have a slew of different migraine medications. For my patients who come to see me, I really try to stay away from conventional meds as much as possible. And that's really why women are coming to see me, because they don't want the conventional answer. So depending on the age of my patient, if it's a younger patient, like a teenager, I do a lot of dietary intervention. So I think it's important to know that there are definitely some kind of categories of foods that impact your hormones in a negative way. Dairy is a big one. So, dairy, whether it's cheese or milk or cream or yogurt, things like that, can really negatively impact hormones. So I have my patients go dairy free. And then the other sort of inflammatory food groups that I tend to have my patients avoid are gluten, sugar, and processed food. So there's a dietary intervention that I kind of start with. And I have a functional nutritionist that I have my patients work with. The other thing that I'll do for my younger patients is there's a great supplement called Vitex, which is chasteberry. And chasteberry is just a berry that this sort of supplement is derived from. And what it does is it helps to balance out that progesterone to estrogen ratio. So if I can get away with just doing Vitex for my younger women, and I give it to them every single day, then that's great. Then I don't have to go to hormones. But if we've tried the diet, if we've tried the Vitex, if we've done that for a few cycles and nothing has made a difference, or it's not enough of a difference, then I'll do a progesterone, a bioidentical progesterone cream. And that makes a huge difference in balancing out their estrogen. So it just raises their progesterone to enough of a level where they no longer have those symptoms, and it's life-changing. Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with our diet. So again, kind of the dairy, the eggs, chicken, like the things that are the hormones that are kind of pumped into our food in this country, I think has a huge impact on hormones. And I think that that's a lot of the reason why we see younger women girls having periods at 8, for example. So I think the diet is probably the number one reason. And I think, probably the other is kind of toxic exposures. So if you think of endocrine disruptors, chemicals, whether they're in the home that the child is exposed to, or, in their environment, those significantly impact hormones, and they can be significant endocrine disruptors And those endocrine disruptors affect hormones and can cause a period to come on at an earlier age.
That's actually in line. I've done some research with this for some of my workshops, and there was a lot of talk about the fact that many years ago, hundreds of years ago, there has been data, or there have been accounts that say periods did start later in your life, and you had a smaller window for having children because, of course, people died younger as well. But it is really interesting that there's this scientific and medical reason behind that. So yeah, thank you.
It can stay very consistent. So typically, if you have a hormone imbalance, I see a lot of women in menopause. A large percentage of my practice are menopausal women who are coming in to see me for hot flashes and night sweats and sleep disturbances and things like that. So what I find when I talk to them is that their hormone imbalance has been going on since they were teenagers. So I think that if you have that, a lot of those symptoms as a teenager and you don't get them figured out, like you don't find someone who really specializes in hormones, who can kind of figure out that imbalance and optimize your hormones, those women suffer. And they suffer for, in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And a lot of times it affects fertility. So, these women who have hormone imbalance, have a difficult time getting pregnant. A lot of the times it leads to even more additional things like ovarian cysts and fibroids, which leads to hysterectomies. So there's a whole kind of path that can happen if hormones are not figured out at an earlier age. So I think it's something, that, some women do grow out of, but if they haven't grown out of it by the time they're in their 20s, I think it's something really important to have evaluated. And if it's something that's so debilitating as a teenager where they're missing school because of it, for example, then I think that's another reason to have it evaluated earlier than later. So for sure, that's sort of the go-to in conventional medicine, is putting a young girl, a teenager, on birth control pills in order to mitigate their symptoms, and basically just to kind of make their period go away. So that is the strategy I'd say 90% of the time, if a girl were to go to her doctor. However, when you do that, you're basically taking, and Eleanor and I have talked about this before, you're taking the complete hormonal structure that we have as women that makes us a woman, and you're shutting that whole system down, and you're saying, I don't want any of that. So while it does affect the symptoms, it can affect symptoms positively. It's not the right strategy in my mind. So it's not that we need to completely suppress the hormones, it's that we need to optimize the hormones. So the hormones are out of balance. That ratio is askew, and we need to just bring those hormones back in line and address those from different perspectives, like diet and environment, and supplements if needed, and hormones if needed. But the answer is not completely shutting down the hormonal system, because the other thing is that when you shut down the endocrine system with birth control pills, you're suppressing the hormones, and more specifically, you're suppressing progesterone, which is our own natural antidepressant, our own natural anti-anxiety hormone. So what you find is, in a lot of these girls who go on birth control, they are now completely depressed. And so, but there's no link that's actually made. Like it's people don't really make that connection because it's not common knowledge. But so you have women on birth control, and now they're on, anti-anxiety medication or antidepressant medication because their progesterone is dropped. It's the same thing that causes postpartum depression, for example. So you think about women who've had a baby. When they're pregnant, they're flooded with progesterone. After they give birth, all of that progesterone leaves with that placenta. And so again, thinking about progesterone being our own natural antidepressant, an anti-anxiety hormone, now you've got a woman who, if she was already like maybe a little bit deficient before she got pregnant, and now she is, she's even more deficient in that progesterone, those women are at high risk for postpartum. So it's, there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation about hormones that I think, having this workshop is important to kind of get the information out there of how important our hormones are, and how we really don't want to suppress them with birth control. That's not the answer, and why it's so important to have them be in balance.
Yeah, and that is actually a really good point about this workshop. There's also going to be another workshop in the future, the managing menstruation for all, managing periods for all, that Julie is going to come to and discuss similar things and be able to speak more broadly, and perhaps even share some infographics, because unfortunately there's some technical issues today. But yeah, that's just want to put the word out there. There is going to be another workshop that is focusing more predominantly on this sort of issue. I think we're getting ready to wrap it up. I'm going to end the recording. So thank you all for coming. This will be the end.